was a quiet night in Buenos Aires when I first heard about Villa Devoto. The city was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, the hum of traffic far in the distance, and the general murmur of life that never seemed to fully sleep. It was the kind of evening where the air felt calm, yet there was something in the silence that made it feel almost too still. My friend, Laura, a local historian, and I were sitting at a small table in one of those cozy restaurants tucked away in the city's older districts. The food was simple, but delicious. A comforting bowl of pasta, some red wine, and the warmth of conversation. It wasn't until she leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting in the soft light, that the subject shifted. "Have you heard about the haunted villa?" she asked, almost casually, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment to bring it up. I had heard of many legends and tales that circulated around Buenos Aires, but this one was new to me. "A haunted villa?" I replied, raising an eyebrow, skeptical yet intrigued. Laura's expression changed. It was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. A flicker of something dark, like a shadow passing through her thoughts. "Yes," she said, lowering her voice slightly, though the restaurant wasn't crowded enough for anyone to be eavesdropping. "Villa Devoto. It's in the outskirts of the city, but most people avoid talking about it. They don't go near it. They say it's cursed, haunted, a place where strange things happen." I leaned in, suddenly much more interested than I had been before. The mention of a haunted place had always piqued my curiosity, even if I was cautious not to get too involved in the stories that seemed to circulate endlessly in a city with such a deep, mysterious history. "Strange things? What do you mean?" Laura paused, her fingers drumming lightly on the side of her wine glass. Her eyes turned distant, almost as if she were reliving something from the past. "It's hard to explain. People hear things at night, whispers from the villa, screams carried by the wind. There are tales of shadows moving in the windows when no one is there. And worse, people have disappeared after venturing too close to it. No one talks about it openly, but if you ask the locals, they'll tell you to stay away." My heart skipped a beat. "Disappear? You mean people actually vanish?" She nodded slowly, her face grim. "Yes, but it's not like in the movies, not some ghost coming after you. It's more subtle than that. People go missing, and no one ever really knows why. It's as if the villa itself is pulling them in, making them vanish into thin air. The police have investigated, of course, but they never found any solid answers. It's almost like the villa has a life of its own." I couldn't help but feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was something in her tone, something in the way she spoke, that made me believe she wasn't just telling a spooky story. She truly believed what she was saying, and perhaps so did the people who lived in the area. I could feel my pulse quicken, the thrill of the unknown taking hold of me. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, by the mysteries that lingered in forgotten corners of the world. Laura had grown up in Buenos Aires, hearing the whispers of Villa Devoto from her childhood. But it was something else that made her share the story with me tonight. Maybe it was the glint in her eyes, the way she seemed to pause before every word, weighing it carefully. as if the very act of speaking the villa's name somehow made it more real. "So, what happened to the people who vanished?" I asked, unable to keep my voice steady. She shook her head. "No one knows. Some people think it's the spirit of the family that used to live there." A tragic story, apparently. There were rumors about dark rituals, evil happenings. But again, it's all just speculation. It's been abandoned for years, and now it just sits there, rotting away, with no one daring to even go near it. Her words echoed in my mind long after we finished dinner. The villa, a forgotten place shrouded in mystery, with rumors of ghosts and disappearances. Something about it tugged at me, calling me to uncover its secrets. It wasn't the first haunted place I had ever heard of, but there was a certain pull to the story that I couldn't ignore. I wanted to know more. I wanted to see it for myself. It wasn't enough to just listen to the stories. I had to experience it. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. I had already packed my camera, a flashlight, and a notepad. There was something thrilling about the idea of setting foot in a place like Villa Devoto, a place that had become the stuff of local legend. The day felt oddly heavy, as though the weight of what I was about to do pressed down on me before I even set foot outside. I gathered my courage and made my way through the busy streets of Buenos Aires, heading for the outskirts of the city where Villa Devoto supposedly stood. The journey felt longer than I had anticipated, each passing block seeming to stretch out further. The city's buzz faded as I left behind the bustling neighborhoods, and soon I found myself in a quieter, more desolate part of the town. The houses became more spaced out, and the streets less traveled. My mind raced with thoughts of what I might find, what secrets I might uncover in that forgotten place. When I finally reached the area, the villa didn't immediately appear. I had read descriptions of its location, but I didn't realize how secluded it really was. As I walked down a narrow road surrounded by thick trees and overgrown grass, I saw the outline of the villa emerge in the distance. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a crumbling, forgotten relic from another time. The once grand stone walls were now coated in a layer of grime, and the windows seemed to stare out like hollow eyes, empty and yet full of something I couldn't quite name. The air around me felt charged, thick with the weight of history, and perhaps something else, something darker. As I drew closer, I noticed that there were no signs of life, no caretakers, no visitors. It was as if the villa had been abandoned long ago, but no one dared to even clean up the place. The rusted gates stood ajar, creaking in the wind, and the front door was slightly open. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, I hesitated. What had I gotten myself into? But then, the thought of the stories, the whispers of the villa, drove me forward. I stepped past the gate, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, and made my way toward the entrance. The silence around me was suffocating. There were no birds, no wind, just an eerie stillness. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness beyond. I arrived at the villa just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sky that slowly turned to a deep, bruised purple. The villa stood alone on a small hill, its silhouette rising against the fading light. It looked eerie, as if it had been forgotten by time itself, a relic from a bygone era. A large, rusty fence surrounded the property, and the iron gates, weathered by years of neglect, creaked in the wind. The air was heavy, laden with a kind of stillness that pressed down on everything, making the world feel as though it had stopped moving. Even the usual sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic and chatter, seemed to disappear as I drew closer. The only noise was the occasional rustle of leaves from the trees that lined the path. But even that felt oddly muted, as though the wind itself was holding its breath. I approached the gate, my footsteps soft on the gravel road, and reached out to push it open. The metal groaned in protest, its hinges rusty and stiff, as if reluctant to allow anyone entry. A shiver ran down my spine. I paused for a moment, half expecting something, or someone, to appear from the shadows. But nothing did. The gate slowly swung open, and I stepped inside. The feeling of being watched was almost palpable, though there was no one there. The air seemed to hold something unseen, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As I walked closer to the villa, the first thing that struck me was how abandoned it looked. The stone walls, once grand and elegant, were now cracked and weathered. The ivy that had once been carefully tended had long since taken over, its tendrils creeping up the walls, winding their way into every crack and crevice. The windows were shattered, some of them completely missing, leaving empty, gaping holes that seemed to stare back at me. The villa's once pristine facade had been ravaged by time, the edges softened by erosion and decay. But even in its disrepair, there was something hauntingly beautiful about it. It had an old-world charm that was impossible to ignore. But it was also the kind of beauty that felt tainted, like a forgotten dream. It wasn't just a house. It was a story waiting to be told, a mystery begging to be uncovered. The closer I got, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't just the physical decay that unsettled me. It was the stillness, the absence of life. I hadn't seen a soul since I entered the property, and the villa seemed so isolated, so cut off from the rest of the world, that it felt as if time had stopped here. It was as though the villa existed in its own bubble, far removed from the city, untouched by the passing years. The once vibrant gardens had turned into a wild, tangled mess. The flowers withered and forgotten. The path leading to the front door was overgrown with weeds, the cobblestones half buried beneath layers of dirt and moss. The wind whistled through the trees, but the silence around the villa itself was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and made my way toward the front door. The heavy wooden door was partially ajar, as though it had been left open by someone. Perhaps someone who had visited not too long ago, or perhaps someone who had never left. The door was dark, almost black, with an intricate carving on its surface that had long since lost its fine details. The carving depicted strange, swirling patterns, almost like runes or symbols that didn't belong in this time. I reached out and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the silence, as if the house were protesting my intrusion. As I stepped inside, I immediately felt a drop in temperature. The air was thick and musty, carrying the scent of old wood, damp stone, and something else, something sharp and pungent, like decay, like rot. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and forgotten things. I stepped further into the darkness, my flashlight cutting through the gloom, casting long shadows on the walls. The light revealed cracked tiles on the floor, remnants of what must have been a grand hallway. But now, it was just a hollow shell, its beauty hidden beneath layers of dust and neglect. I hesitated for a moment, standing in the entryway. The darkness seemed to stretch out before me, enveloping the entire villa. The oppressive stillness was almost suffocating. It felt as though something was waiting in the shadows, watching me, following my every move. I shook off the unease, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But the feeling lingered, a cold weight that pressed against my chest. I moved deeper into the villa, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The floor creaked beneath my weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors that led to rooms I couldn't see. Each door was slightly ajar, as if someone had been here recently, but the house was empty. The air felt so thick, so stagnant, that it was hard to breathe. It was as though the villa itself had absorbed all the life that had once existed within it, leaving only an eerie void behind. As I walked further, I began to notice the small details that made the place seem even more unsettling. There were strange markings on the walls, scratches, faded symbols, or maybe just the remnants of something that had once been painted. The wallpaper, now peeling and torn, seemed to have once been a deep, rich red, but now it was faded and worn, like an old photograph left out in the sun for too long. The furniture, what little was left, was shrouded in thick layers of dust, but there was something off about it. The chairs were placed oddly, as if someone had hurriedly abandoned them, and the few pieces of artwork that remained on the walls had the same haunting quality as the house itself. They were faded and obscured, as though they were trying to hide something. And then I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable. A whisper. It was so quiet at first that I almost thought it was the wind, or maybe the creaking of the old house settling. But then, the whisper came again. A soft murmur, almost like a voice calling from the depths of the villa. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned around, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. But there was no one. The hallway was empty, the shadows stretching long across the floor. I waited, listening intently, but the whisper faded away, leaving only the silence once more. Was it the wind or something else? I couldn't be sure. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I had heard stories, of course, of haunted places where voices echoed through the walls. But this felt different. This was real. This was happening now. I took another step forward, the whisper still lingering in the back of my mind. And as I did, I heard it again. A faint sound, distant but clear, like a voice, but not quite human. It was as though the walls themselves were speaking, calling out to me from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze once again. The temperature seemed to drop even further, the cold seeping into my bones. I looked around, my eyes scanning the empty rooms, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The villa had always been known for its strange happenings, its whispers, its dark history. But now I was experiencing it firsthand, and I couldn't help but wonder. Was it the house itself that was haunted? Or was something else waiting for me in the darkness? I decided that the only way to truly understand the dark aura surrounding Villa Devoto was to dig deeper into its history. The villa, with its decaying exterior and the lingering sense of something unseen, had a past shrouded in mystery and terror. The more I learned, the more unsettling the story became. What had once been a grand and opulent estate had turned into something far darker, far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. The story of Villa Devoto began with the Devoto family, a wealthy and influential aristocratic family in Argentina. The family had made their fortune in the late 19th century, and by the time they moved into the villa, they were already one of the most prominent and well-respected families in Buenos Aires. Their wealth was vast, and they spared no expense in building the villa, designing it to be a symbol of their success and power. The villa itself was a masterpiece, filled with opulent rooms, ornate furniture, and grand chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. Outside, manicured gardens stretched for acres, with fountains that glistened in the sunlight, giving the villa an almost otherworldly charm. The Devotos held lavish parties, their home becoming the center of high society in the city. Guests came from all over the world to admire their luxurious lifestyle and to partake in the extravagant feasts that lasted deep into the night. But behind closed doors, there were whispers. Whispers that the family wasn't as perfect as they seemed. The servants spoke of strange rituals held in the dead of night, of shadows moving in the windows when no one was supposed to be there, and of dark figures that appeared and disappeared without explanation. These stories were usually dismissed as rumors, The wild imaginings of servants who were either too superstitious or too frightened to understand what was truly happening within the villa's walls. But as the years went by, these rumors grew darker and more persistent. People began to notice that the Devotos seemed to keep to themselves more and more, withdrawing from society, and their once bustling social calendar slowly became empty. Then, one night, tragedy struck. The entire Devoto family vanished without a trace. No one knew where they had gone. No bodies were ever found, no clues left behind. It was as if the family had disappeared into thin air. The villa was left standing, an eerie monument to their absence. The servants who had worked for them were gone as well, all of them mysteriously disappearing at the same time. The streets of Buenos Aires were filled with rumors of what had happened to the Devotos. Some claimed they had been murdered, their bodies hidden somewhere within the house, while others spoke of a terrible curse that had been placed on the family. But the truth remained elusive, and the villa, once a symbol of wealth and power, became a ghostly shell of its former self. In the years following their disappearance, the villa became a place of dread. People spoke of strange occurrences in the surrounding area. Some claimed to hear unearthly noises at night, voices crying out in anguish, followed by eerie silences. Others swore they saw figures moving in the windows, figures that seemed to watch anyone who dared come too close. Yet, despite the whispers and warnings, people continued to visit the villa, hoping to uncover its secrets. But those who ventured too far into the property never returned. Some were simply never seen again, while others were found in a state of shock, unable to speak of what they had experienced. They were too broken, too terrified to tell their stories. One of the most chilling accounts came from a group of teenagers who had heard the stories about Villa Devoto and decided to visit it one night, armed with nothing but their curiosity and a few bottles of cheap alcohol. They never came back. When the police were called to search for them, they found nothing but their abandoned belongings at the entrance to the villa. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to them. It was as if they had simply disappeared, swallowed by the night. The only thing the authorities found was a strange, cryptic message scrawled on the villa's front door in what appeared to be blood. The price of curiosity is death. The message was never explained, and the teenagers were never found. Over the years, more and more people came and went, but the result was always the same. Those who dared to enter the villa would never come out, or they would be found in a catatonic state, unable to speak of their experiences. The locals who lived near the villa spoke of strange lights that flickered in the windows at night, and of shadows that moved across the yard when no one was around. As time went on, the stories surrounding Villa Devoto grew darker, more terrifying. People started to believe that the family had not just disappeared. They had been taken by something far more sinister. Some said they had made a deal with the devil, performing a dark ritual in exchange for their wealth and power. Others believed that the villa itself was cursed, a place where the veil between the living and the dead was dangerously thin. Still others whispered that the Devotos had opened a portal to another realm, one that was not meant to be entered. But the most disturbing theory, the one that haunted my dreams and made my heart race every time I thought of it, was that the Devoto family had never truly left. Some believed they had become part of the villa itself, their souls trapped within its walls for all eternity. It was said that the spirits of the family now roamed the villa, forever trying to complete the ritual they had started so long ago. A ritual that had gone horribly wrong. And those who entered the villa, seeking the truth or simply looking to prove their courage, were doomed to become part of that dark history, either as another lost soul or as one of the few who had been fortunate enough to escape, but never the same again. The more I learned about the Devotos and their disappearance, the more I realized that the villa wasn't just haunted by their spirits. It was haunted by something far more ancient, something that had been awakened by their actions. I could feel it in the air as I stood at the gates, that eerie stillness that seemed to cling to the place. The spirits of the family, the whispers in the dark, and the stories of those who had vanished without a trace. It all pointed to something much worse than a simple haunting. The villa wasn't just a house that had been abandoned by the living. It was a place where death itself had settled, and it had no intention of letting go. As I read through old records and interviews with the few survivors who had dared to speak about their encounters, I began to understand the gravity of what I was up against. The villa was not just an abandoned mansion. It was a cursed place, a place that had claimed the lives of many. And as I stood there, at the edge of that forgotten property, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made a terrible mistake? Was I about to become another chapter in the terrifying history of Villa Devoto? As night descended over Villa Devoto, a sense of finality seemed to take hold of the atmosphere. The sun had long since set, and the villa now stood bathed in the cold light of the moon. Shadows stretched across the yard like long, ghostly fingers, and the air had taken on a deep, almost suffocating chill. I had already heard so much about the villa, the strange stories, the eerie disappearances, but something inside me urged me to stay. There was a force compelling me, as if I was meant to uncover the truth about this place, meant to witness the horrors that others had only whispered about. I wasn't one to shy away from danger, at least not when it came to uncovering mysteries. Armed only with my phone and a flashlight, I moved further into the darkened interior of the villa, determined to face whatever was lurking inside. The beams of light from my flashlight danced across the walls, briefly illuminating faded wallpaper, cracked wooden panels, and dusty furniture left behind as remnants of the past. Each step I took seemed to echo throughout the house, reverberating through the empty rooms, the silence pressing in around me. The deeper I ventured, the more the air seemed to change. It was no longer just cold, it was heavy, like a thick fog that clung to everything, making it difficult to breathe. It felt as though the very atmosphere was pushing against me, closing in from all sides. I could feel the weight of the silence bearing down, and with each passing second, it became harder to ignore the sense that I was not alone. I reached a large hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet as I moved forward. The walls were lined with old portraits, their frames hanging crookedly, as though forgotten and left to age with the house. The faces in the paintings were blurry with time, but I could make out the eyes, the dark, staring eyes of long-dead ancestors of the family that had once lived here. It was as though they were following me, their gaze unblinking, tracking my every move as I walked deeper into the villa. The sense of being watched was so overwhelming that I couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits weren't just painted representations of these people. No, it felt as though they were alive, watching me, judging me, waiting for something. My flashlight flickered suddenly, casting a brief shadow that danced on the walls before plunging me back into darkness. I instinctively checked the flashlight, but the batteries were fine. It didn't make sense. The light should have been steady, but it had faltered for a moment, as if something unseen had interfered with it. I swallowed hard, my nerves tightening. I couldn't explain it. Was it just a malfunction? Or had something in the villa caused it to flicker like that? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and continued down the hallway. The farther I went, the darker it seemed to get, even with my flashlight illuminating the path ahead. It felt as though the shadows were growing, as if they were spreading, eager to swallow everything in their wake. A sense of unease gnawed at my insides, but I couldn't stop. I had to know what lay at the heart of this place, what had happened to the Devoto family, and why the villa had become such a source of terror. That's when I heard it. It started as a faint sound, a whisper, so soft that at first I wasn't sure I had even heard it at all. My steps faltered as I paused, straining to listen. The sound came again, clearer this time. A voice, low and almost unintelligible, seeping through the silence like a wisp of smoke. It was as if someone was standing just out of sight, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The whisper grew louder, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't just one voice, it was several, overlapping and mingling, like a chorus of whispers from the past. My heart began to race, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned around quickly, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing, no one. The hallway was empty, the darkness stretching ahead, unchanged. The whispering persisted, though, echoing in my ears. It felt closer now, as if it were right next to me, just behind my ear. I could hear the voices more clearly now, but the words were still distorted, too faint to decipher. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively took a step back. The temperature around me dropped further, and the chill in the air seemed to settle into my bones, numbing my senses. The whispers, still faint but ever present, grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel a rising panic in my chest. It was as though the very walls were alive, whispering secrets that had been buried for years, secrets that were meant to remain hidden. I clutched the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white from the pressure. I knew I should leave, that I should turn and run before whatever was causing this madness overwhelmed me. But a strange, compulsive force held me in place. I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. It was as though something or someone was pulling me deeper into the villa, urging me to uncover the truth. And then, without warning, the sound of a door creaking open pierced the stillness. The noise was deafening in the silence of the villa, a shrill screech that seemed to come from the depths of the house. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. Slowly, I turned towards the source of the sound, my flashlight shaking in my hand. A door at the far end of the hallway had opened, its edges creaking as it swung inward with a deliberate slowness, as though something inside was beckoning me closer. I stood, frozen, for a moment, unsure of what to do. I should turn back. I should run. I should leave before whatever force was at work in this place consumed me too. But my body refused to obey. Every instinct told me to flee, but my feet remained rooted to the ground. I couldn't explain why, but I knew that I had to see what was beyond that door. I had to know what waited for me. With a deep, shaky breath, I took a step forward. The whispers continued, but they seemed to fade into the background now, drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop even further, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. It was as if the villa itself was breathing, exhaling its cold, oppressive air into the space around me. I reached the door, my fingers trembling as I pushed it open further. The room inside was bathed in darkness, the corners impossible to make out. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of decay hung in the air, stinging my nostrils. The room felt oppressive, the darkness almost solid in its weight. I stepped inside, the floor creaking underfoot. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off my only source of light. My flashlight flickered again, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, stretching like fingers reaching for me. I didn't know what I expected to find in this room, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There, in the farthest corner, was a figure. It was a shadow, dark and indistinct, but its outline was unmistakable. The figure stood perfectly still, its form shifting slightly, as if it were made of smoke or mist. I couldn't see its face, overwhelming my senses. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure that stood just beyond the reach of my flashlight's glow. Then, without warning, the figure stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate, and I felt a cold hand of fear grip my heart. It was as though the very room itself had come alive, pulling me deeper into its depths. And I knew then, in that moment, that there was no turning back.
The door creaked open with a groan, its hinges protesting as if they too had been waiting for this moment. The room beyond was shrouded in an eerie darkness, but the faintest outline of ornate furniture could be seen through the gloom. I stepped inside slowly, my footfalls muffled by the thick layers of dust that covered the floor. The space felt vast, far larger than I had anticipated. And yet, it felt strangely claustrophobic, as if the walls were pressing inward, closing off the outside world. The air was colder here, the temperature dropping sharply as I entered the room. It wasn't just the absence of warmth. It was something else, something palpable, like the chill of an ancient presence that had lingered in the space for far too long. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the distant creaks of the house. But even those sounds felt muffled, as if the room itself was absorbing every noise, every movement. As I took a step forward, the air seemed to shift, and an overwhelming sensation washed over me. The feeling that I was no longer alone, that the room itself had become alive, watching me with unseen eyes. The walls, lined with faded wallpaper, felt as though they were leaning in toward me. The portraits on the walls, those same haunting faces I had seen earlier, seemed to glare down, their eyes tracking my every move. It was as though the very space was breathing, in and out, with a rhythm I could almost feel in my own chest. I could sense the presence of something ancient in the room, something that had been trapped within these walls for years, maybe centuries, waiting for someone like me to stumble into its grasp. I moved cautiously, my flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness, but it didn't feel like enough. The darkness seemed to bend and twist as though it were alive, consuming the light before it could reach its full extent. Every shadow felt like it was moving, stretching, ready to wrap itself around me. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to keep walking, pushing through the dread that threatened to take hold. It was then that I saw it. At first, it was just a blur, a dark figure standing in the far corner of the room. The shadows clung to it, distorting its form, making it appear like something half real and half phantom. It was impossible to make out its features, but I could feel its presence, a heavy weight in the room that seemed to draw all the light into itself. It stood motionless, as though it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I stood frozen, unable to move, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was tall, its shape vaguely human, but there was something wrong about it,
something that made every instinct in my body scream at me to turn around and run. The edges of its form blurred, flickering in and out like a distortion in the air. Its face, or what I could see of it, was obscured by the shadows, its features unreadable. It felt like a nightmare made flesh, something pulled from the deepest recesses of my mind. The more I stared at it, the more I felt my stomach twist in knots. I tried to force myself to look away, to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the longer I stared, the more real it became, and then, without warning, it moved. The figure took a step toward me, its movements unnaturally smooth, as though it were gliding rather than walking. I stumbled backward, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. Panic surged through me, and for a fleeting second, I thought about turning and running, about finding the nearest exit and never looking back. But my feet refused to obey. They were rooted to the floor, frozen in place as if some invisible force was holding me there, keeping me from escaping. The air around me thickened, the atmosphere pressing down on my chest like a weight, making it harder to breathe. I could see my breath now, small clouds of vapor rising into the frigid air. My body reacting to the sudden drop in temperature. It wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The kind of cold that made you feel like you were being pulled into the very depths of the earth. The room seemed to grow darker still, the shadows in the corners of the room expanding, creeping toward me like tendrils reaching out to drag me into the abyss. I wanted to scream, to break free from the paralyzing fear that had taken hold of me, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Then the figure spoke. The voice came from the darkness, low and guttural, a sound that sent chills running down my spine. It was deep, vibrating in the very air around me, as if it had been buried within the walls of the villa for centuries, waiting to be unleashed. The words came slowly, deliberately, each syllable dripping with a cold malice that I could feel deep in my gut. "Leave, now, or join us forever." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. The voice was not human. There was no warmth to it, no compassion, only a deep, unyielding darkness. It wasn't a warning, it was a command. And as I stood there, the weight of those words hanging in the air, I felt a terrible sense of inevitability. I knew in that moment that whatever was in front of me wasn't just a ghost or a spirit. It was something far older, something far more powerful than I could ever comprehend. It was as though the very room, the villa itself, had come alive, breathing and speaking through the darkness. It was as if the walls, the floors, the shadows, all of it had conspired to trap me here, to pull me deeper into its depths. The figure took another step forward, and I could feel the air growing colder still. It was as if every step it took toward me was drawing the very warmth from my body, leaving me numb and paralyzed. The whispers, which had been faint at first, now grew louder again, their voices overlapping and growing frantic. They seemed to be calling to me, beckoning me toward the figure, toward whatever lay in the depths of the room. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to turn and run, to break free from this nightmare. But the other part of me, some dark, twisted part, wanted to stay, wanted to understand what was happening, to see the truth, no matter how terrible it was. The whispers and the voice had both called to me, as if I were meant to be there, as though the villa had been waiting for me, for this moment. "Leave, now," the voice repeated, its tone growing more insistent, more urgent. "Or join us forever." My mind screamed at me to run, but my body remained still, caught in the grip of something far beyond my control. The figure moved closer still, its form more solid now, its presence consuming the space between us. I could feel its coldness, an unnatural chill that seemed to bleed into my skin, numbing me from the inside out. And then I saw it. A glimpse of something, a face, a fleeting image, too quick to process, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The face was not human. It was twisted, a grotesque mockery of the human form, its eyes hollow and dark, its mouth stretched in a grimace that seemed to be both a scream and a smile. I couldn't look away. The figure was almost upon me now, and I felt the suffocating weight of its presence closing in. The whispers were deafening, swirling around me like a storm, and for a brief moment, I thought I might collapse under the pressure of it all. My mind screamed in terror, and my body trembled, but still, I stood frozen, unable to move. "Leave," the voice repeated, one last time, the command like a death sentence, hanging in the air. And then, as quickly as it had come, the figure vanished, dissolving into the shadows, leaving nothing but the cold, suffocating silence behind. I didn't wait to find out what it meant. The moment the figure disappeared, the heavy silence of the room seemed to collapse in on itself, as though the very walls of the villa were closing in, constricting around me. I didn't dare look back. Instincts I didn't even know I had kicked in, and my legs moved before my mind could process what was happening. My heart was racing, my breath shallow, but I didn't care. I bolted for the door, not bothering to close it behind me. I needed to get out. The villa, with its twisting shadows and oppressive air, had become a prison, and I was desperate to escape. A hallway stretched before me, the darkness thick and all-consuming. My flashlight flickered erratically, casting fleeting, trembling beams of light as I ran, the narrow beam barely illuminating the path ahead. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, as though they were reaching out, trying to pull me back into the heart of the house. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, like the very ground beneath me was reluctant to let me go. The whispers, those soft, unintelligible voices, seemed to be growing louder again, circling around me like a swarm of insects. I couldn't hear the words, but the feeling of being surrounded by them was suffocating. I pushed forward, my shoes sliding across the worn floorboards, each step louder in the silence. The villa was vast, too vast, and the corridors felt like they went on forever, twisting and turning like a labyrinth. I had no sense of direction, only the overwhelming urge to get out, to put as much distance between myself and the horrors I had witnessed. Finally, I reached the front door. It was ajar, just as I had left it. The chill of the night air flooded into the house as I pushed it open, the door groaning as it swung wide. The feeling of the cold outside was a relief, if only for a moment. I stepped into the yard, my legs trembling beneath me. I didn't dare look back at the villa, even though every instinct told me to run faster. I could feel the weight of the house behind me, as though it were watching me, waiting for me to falter. As I sprinted toward the gate, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but they were there. The sound of movement, slow and deliberate, following me, getting closer with every passing second. My pulse spiked. I knew I shouldn't turn around, but the fear was overwhelming. It was the kind of terror that grabs hold of your mind and doesn't let go. But I couldn't, no matter how badly I wanted to, dare glance back. Something told me that looking behind me would only make things worse, that it would confirm what I already feared. The footsteps weren't imagined. They were real. They were following me. I pushed my legs harder, willing my body to move faster, despite the panic threatening to consume me. The gate was just ahead now. The rusty iron bars silhouetted against the faint light of the distant streetlights. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the cold air burned my lungs as I ran. The footsteps behind me grew louder, and I swore I could feel them, feel whatever was following me getting closer. Its presence closing in on me like a predator hunting its prey. I reached the gate and threw myself at it, my hands scrambling for the latch. My fingers were numb, trembling with fear. But I finally managed to pry it open. I could hear the soft, relentless footsteps behind me, no longer just distant echoes, but clear and close. The gate creaked as I shoved it wide, nearly falling through as I burst into the open road. The world outside the villa felt almost unreal, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness of the villa. I didn't stop to look, didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of my feet pounding against the pavement, the only noise in the night. I didn't know how far I ran, but I didn't stop until the sounds of the footsteps had faded, until the feeling of being chased, being pursued, had lessened. When I reached the streetlights, the bright yellow glow was a beacon of safety. I stopped, my chest heaving with exhaustion, and turned my head just slightly to glance back. There was nothing. The road behind me was empty. The villa, too, was nothing more than a silhouette in the distance, its dark outline barely visible against the backdrop of the night sky. The footsteps had stopped. The air felt normal again, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders. For a moment, I stood there, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Was it over? Had I really escaped? But deep down, I knew the answer. The terror didn't leave me. It lingered in my chest, a tight, suffocating knot that refused to loosen. As I stood there, breathing heavily under the harsh light of the street lamp, I realized that the villa hadn't just let me go. It hadn't finished with me yet. The feeling of being followed, of something lurking just beyond the edge of my awareness, stayed with me long after I had left Villa Devoto. The oppressive silence of the villa, the whispers in the dark, the shadowy figure that had moved toward me. Those things hadn't vanished when I left the gates. No, they had followed me. Somehow, they had attached themselves to me, to my very soul. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, still watching me. I tried to tell myself that I had made it, that I had escaped. But the truth was that I wasn't sure. Even now, as I write this, I can still feel it. The weight of eyes on me. The cold breath of something unseen, just beyond the threshold of my awareness. That night, I returned to my apartment, the door locking behind me with a sense of finality. But the terror didn't stop there. It never truly stopped. I still hear the whispers sometimes, faint and distant, as if they're carried on the wind. I still feel the cold in the air, even when the sun is high in the sky. The villa has a way of lingering, of finding its way back into your thoughts, like a shadow that can't be shaken. And despite everything, despite the way the lights of the city are meant to protect me, I can't help but feel that Villa Devoto isn't done with me yet. I've tried to move on, to forget what happened, but it's impossible. Every corner I turn, every darkened hallway I pass, I feel the pull of the villa, the pull of its darkness, of its secrets. I don't know what it is that follows me now. I don't know if it's a shadow, a ghost, or something even worse. But I do know one thing. No matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to escape, it won't let me go. Villa Devoto isn't finished with me yet, and it never will be.